Good morning, good afternoon, and really good morning to Philip, almost to the point of being good evening.
Good morning.
I am seeing that the chat is disabled. So one of my tests that I always do is go out and verify that you guys can hear us. It's going to be very, very difficult with there's our chat window. So I actually needed to start the session. So if I can get somebody in the chat window to go ahead and say that they can hear us, I will start the presentation and then actually introduce Philip. So if I can get anybody just to go out and say hello. Got 20 people, 30 people now online. Let's go ahead and assume that they're hearing us rather than, Daniel Stewart, thank you very much. I appreciate the ack back, if you will. So this morning, for me, I've actually got Philip Seamark. Philip Seamark what is your title, Philip?
My job title is a Senior BI Architect at a company called TradeMe in New Zealand. And if you've ever spent any time in New Zealand, you'll be well aware of this company. If you've never been to New Zealand, you wouldn't. I'll forgive you for never have heard of TradeMe, if you know what I mean. Yeah, excuse me. It is 5 in the morning here, so I'm probably not firing on all cylinders just yet.
And when I was based in Australia, I actually bought fishing tackle from TradeMe. So TradeMe is the eBay of the Southern continent. And Philip has actually really helped take this company from, last time I checked, I think it was like 70% of the entire company is actually using Power BI to actually figure out how is the business going, what are the customers saying about it, and what can they do to improve it. So the whole lean business methodology is being enabled by Power BI. So of course, I'm very keen to see how he actually helped his company do that, helped his employees, and he's got actually a set of best practices and tips and tricks that he actually does at the local user group. So again, the premise for these webinars is if you don't have a local user group nearby, or if you do and you haven't seen this particular topic, making it a way for you very easily to go out and interact with the community. So Philip, with that, that's most of my, and of course, you guys can't talk to us. Me and Philip can talk to each other, as you just found out. But if you need to ask a question, or if you'd like to ask Philip a question, throw it in the chat window, just like Daniel Stewart just did. And at the next pause or the next logical break, I'll ask Philip the question for you. So Philip, with that, I have to say it was really nice seeing you at the Microsoft Data Insight Summit. And it was nice seeing you at the house.
Cool, that's right. It was good fun. It was definitely nice to meet you in person for the first time. So yeah, a little bit more background. I am a Microsoft MVP in Power BI. I also run the local user group here in Wellington, New Zealand, and we use it heavily at work. And I actually use Power BI quite heavily myself personally. I do things like collect my personal banking data, and rather than use a paid product to see where I waste my money, I just absorb it into Power BI, and within 5 to 10 minutes, I can build a pretty effective dashboard about where I waste my money. It doesn't stop me wasting my money, but I also collect weather data, and that's what I'm going to be sharing and showing you today. Ignore the fact that it is weather data. These are going to be a whole bunch of tips and tricks that I've picked up through my work as an MVP, or through work, or through the user group. But if you could imagine this data perhaps might be your own business metrics, or something that you're interested in using Power BI for, what I can hopefully do is share with you today some tips that might make it easy for you to maybe do something you've been struggling with or trying to do. The genesis of this particular talk was I went to the Microsoft Data Insight Summit last year, and one of the sessions I really enjoyed was a tips and tricks session by Will Thompson, who I think is a product manager on the Power BI team. And he just walked through a whole series of quite clever little things, and I really enjoyed that myself personally. And what I've done is I've built on that. I've kind of had to, because the problem is with Power BI, every month they release a whole bunch of new features that means you don't necessarily have to do the workaround or the trick or hack that you used to have to do. But let's just see if I can share something useful to you today. So, assuming you can see my screen, you might see a multicolored 100% clustered bar chart with some weather data. The nice easy one I want to start with is just simply ordering columns, and this is probably something most people encounter when they first use Power BI. They bring in some data and they say, I want to group this by month or by weekday, and then they scratch their head and wonder why with months, April and August are always at the top of the list rather than chronologically ordered. And as you'll see here, my weekdays start with F, Friday, Monday, Saturday, Sunday, and that's because by default, Power BI with text columns assumes that it should be sorted alphanumerically. It could be smart. It could be smarter. Perhaps in a future release of Power BI, it can look at the entries in that column, and if it sees a January, a February, a March, that the default sort order be a chronological sort order. I know it's a little more complicated than that because you have variations of January, such as Jan or Janu and other language support, etc. But to get started, the very easy way to make sure that we can order these things the way we would like to is to find the column that we're using, and in this case I'm using a column called Day of the Week. It's highlighted in my yellow dates column. I'm going to find that column, and in my modeling tab I'm going to tell it to sort by a different column. Now the different column I'm using is just a numeric version of that, and we're going to have a look at that in a second, the code that uses this particular sorting. But let's see what happens across this page, because there's going to be a few things that happen. First of all, the legend is sorted correctly now. So we have our days in order. So we have Sunday. Well, I've actually got this. Oh, it's in reverse order. That's cool. We can fix that. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. What's also happened is it's influenced the order that these bars occur in the 100% clustered bar chart. Now, this can be quite a useful technique to take advantage of if you want to control the order that these bars occur in a clustered chart like this. So you might have perhaps 10 categories in sales data, and you have 3 categories which are your big categories, and you might have 7 that are very small in a given metric, be it units or revenue. But if you sorted them alphabetically, you might have a big metric, some small ones, a big one, some small ones, and a big one, and they get a bit lost. If you sort those categories by a column that controls the order, that might mean that you can put all your big ones together at the top or at the bottom, or whichever you prefer, but it allows you to effectively override the default way that those categories are grouped and clustered into the visual. This will work for pie charts, etc. The other place that can influence the ordering of your category is even in the filter list. So you'll notice over here we have the days of the week sorted as they are other places in reverse order in this case. But it did mean, again, if I had some categories that I always wanted to be at the top of the filter list, I can use the sort by column to control that. So that's pretty cool. And if we have a look at the formula I'm using to do that sorting, if I jump over to my dates table, we find that I was sorting by a weekday number, which is just a piece of text that uses the weekday function to convert whatever the day is to a single number, and that's what's controlling the order in this particular case. So that's a nice easy one to start with. Most people probably know that. Maybe you didn't appreciate that it also influences the order that the wedges are in the visual, and also it does control the order that things appear in the field list, which can be handy for longer lists. The next thing I like to do in this is to highlight the grouping feature that we have now. This was introduced perhaps about 3 or 4 months ago. And for me personally, when I look at this data, I see I can't really tell whether weekends are warmer or cooler than weekdays. It always feels like the weekend weather is not as good as the weekday weather. But if we really want to find out for sure, what I can do is I can find my day of the week column and create a group over the top of that. So we're going to create a hierarchy and group these together. So this new group feature will pop up a dialog window, and I can perhaps take a couple of those entries, group them together, and let's call that the weekend. And for the remainder, what I can do is group those together. And these are editable. You can come back and change these and tweak these. We'll call these weekdays. And over here on the right-hand side, you'll see I have a new entry in my field list with this link icon next to it, and it's a group, and we can go in now and we can actually make edits and changes to that group. But if I drag that into my legend, there we go. So what we can see here now is the average maximum temperature in Celsius of this weather data for given months. And I have split the center with a bar. So ignoring the April data of this year, typically it's about the same. So it is what you would actually expect. But that just shows how easy it is to take advantage of grouping to
So what happened in April? Was that when you took vacation?
Probably, actually. I probably wasn't here. Or maybe it's a partial month. Yeah, the weather data we're actually using here is for my house. A couple of years ago, I moved into a place in the countryside, and it has its own little microclimate. So I purchased a small weather data weather set, and that's what I collect to a local database and use to play with this kind of thing. So let's moving along to our next chart. We've got a whole bunch of things here which are going on, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this chart. One of the things not mistakes, but one thing I see quite common for people new to Power BI is they take a set of business data, and there might be 5 core metrics or 6 core metrics, and what they will do is they'll create a Power BI page for each of those core metrics, be it revenue and units or something else. And the pages might look and feel very, very similar. They'll be consistent, which is a really good thing, but there's no need to perhaps create 6 pages when you can do it in 1 page. But Power BI by default still doesn't really allow you to easily switch and mix and match between measures. So I'm going to show you here a technique using a measure table that allows me to do that. So over here, we have 5 core metrics that I have in my data. So we have maximum temperature, minimum temperature, air pressure, humidity, etc. The maximum temperature are probably the easiest one to work out, but just pretend this is your own business data. And I have a chart here showing the max temp for the last 30 days. Now I can cycle through these selectors and in fact probably turn these multi-select. I haven't got that turned on. I can do this on another screen. But so what we're seeing here is I'm providing the user with a way to select from a slicer the measure that they want to have in the chart. And I will show you how you can do that using a measure table. If I go to my relationship view, there, where is it? Where is it? Dynamic. Here we go. I have a hard-coded table where I entered these values directly. I use the enter data value. So I have an ID column, which is a number, and this number is very, very important because I need to use this elsewhere in a piece of DAX to actually find this. The second column is just the description. So whatever I put in here is what's displayed on the slicer or perhaps in the legend. So this is nice and easy. So 1 is max temp, 2 is min temp. Then back over in my, over here, I have a measure value calculated measure, and here's where I actually go and sew that up. So if on a slicer the user selects max temp, what it's going to do is return the value of 1 from that table that we just created, and when the user creates a 1, it's going to actually return this as a measure, and if the user selects a 2, then it's going to return the min temp. And I have these over here as measures. The max temp is just, and here's the actual guts of the measure that it's actually doing. So you still need to create these as measures somewhere, But what I can do is wrap those in a calculated measure, which allows me to go and fish for something dynamically based on a slicer selection. And in fact, date axis legend, measure value, measure name. If I drag the measure name onto the, no, we'll leave that. So that's cool. Another very similar technique I do using a measure table is dynamic date ranges. So what I can do here on this other slicer, which is above it, is have an effect on the visual object by controlling the number of days it will show. So, and I can enter, I can go to my date range table, which is very similar. I have hard coded some values into a table, and in fact, let's add a new entry. So if I'm going to I will edit the query. I'm going to go to my date range table. I'm going to edit the data, and I'm going to put in a numeric value. Now, the numeric value in my case is going to be used in a calculation, whereas the text value could be anything I like. So I might just go last year. Okay, apply that, close that down, go back to my table, and now I have a new entry in my date range slicer called last year. When I click on that, it's going to give me a date range value which uses 365 days. Now, when I developed this tip, we didn't have the fantastic new date range slicer, but this still offers some functionality over the top of that and allowing you to control these buckets. Now, that might be something that's useful or important to you in your company, and it's rolling too. So let's have a look to see how that's done. So in my relationship view, my date range table is not connected to any table. This here just contains those 4 records that we were looking at, and that is what drives my slicer up here in the top right hand corner. So this slicer is just the date range column. So then on my actual date table, I have a date range filter column. And here's where the magic comes in. Now I'm using a measure called Fate Today. This just allows me to go back to a point in time where I know that I've got good data up to. I would normally use the today function here. But all this column is going to do is return a 1 or a 0, depending on whether this date in your date or calendar table happens to sit between the date range. And the date range is today minus the number that I used in that disconnected date range measure table. Now that's quite wordy, but remember I entered a value 365 for that new record at the bottom. Just imagine I'm putting the value of 365 in here, and today it's like a between statement. So if my date is between those 2 days, then return a 1, otherwise return a 0. And I'm going to use this in a filter. So when I select 10 days, all it's going to do is drop the value of 10 into here in a between statement, and it will only return a value of 1 in this column for 10 of those days. And if we go back to the canvas, the trick I do for the visual is here. So that date range filter column needs to be 1. So that's and again, the way DAX and the DAX data modeling environment work is you need to make sure you don't have a relationship between your date range table where you're doing your slicer selection and your date table. Otherwise, it won't work so effectively. And you can use this for a bunch of different things other than just simply date ranges and measures. But normally this might a person building a similar report might start building this out over quite a number of pages, and it's just a much nicer user experience if they can do more in one place. So building on that dynamic measure, what we can do is start doing things like creating more sophisticated versions. So I have a 7-day rolling average and a 30-day rolling average measure, which if we have a look at the DAX for these, I might drag that into the canvas here. So if we have a smoothed out rolling average version, which respects both the time range and also the measure that I have selected. Let's drag in a 30-day rolling average, so you can see that's another smoothed out version. And in fact, we can also do what the measure value was for the previous year. So we can compare, perhaps, for any given period, whether the day was warmer or cooler than the same day last year. So let's have a look at the DAX for the 7-day rolling average. For a start, I'm using the switch function. Switch is really, really good. If you find yourself writing lots and lots of nested if statements, have a good look at the switch statement. It allows you to do sophisticated conditional logic in a much more readable format. But okay, so what we're doing here is, again, we're taking advantage of those hard-coded measure IDs that I used. So max temp is one, and all it's simply doing is just taking an average of the measure and then building into the rest of the classic rolling average date pattern that you might get from excellent websites like DAX Patterns or PowerBI.tips. So this is just performing a rolling average over my dynamic measure. And if we have a look at the 30-day measure, it's exactly the same as the 7-day measure. The only difference being is I have a 30 here. Now I could probably build a dynamic measure table over here if I wanted to. So actually have a table of numbers and present that as a slicer or a selection, so that when I make a selection on that, it will drop into here and mean I can offer the user the ability to create their own version of a rolling average, be it 7 days, 17 days, 90 days. It's just really extending the same pattern. And the period comparison, again, actually this is much simpler. It's just the measure value, which has the dynamic smarts built into it, but wrapping that with the DAX time intelligence feature of same period last year. So that's pretty cool. What else have we got on this page? Oops, we don't want to. We have.
Sorry about that, Philip.
That's all right. There's a presentation mode, which I should probably turn on.
There is. Yeah, you type in mobile and it'll let you actually put it in presentation mode.
Well, that's right. Okay, so we have some dynamic text on this page. So you may or may not have noticed that the title for this chart in the top right hand corner is showing min temp for the last 30 days. Now when I make selection changes here to max temp and 10 days, it updates accordingly. So quite an easy and nice technique to augment your Power BI reports is to add a little bit of dynamic text. Now we can't yet put dynamic text into a title of a chart. What I have done here is this is a separate label visual, and all I've done is dropped onto a measure called dynamic chart title, which we can find over here. And when we have a look at the DAX for that, it's just an exercise in string concatenation. So so what I do here is I say if I only have one measure selected from my measure name, and in this case I only have the max temp selected, which you can see immediately below, then it starts building up a bit of a string saying chart showing, and then it goes and finds a bit of text. So yeah, like I said, it's just an exercise in string concatenation. However, if I have more than one option selected, then it will return another string, and that's it. I also have something similar over here on the bottom right, left hand side. It's asking me to make a selection from the bar chart to the right. Now when I make a selection, it's going to offer some narrative to the report. So when we have a look at this particular measure, it's called DAX annotation. Let's have a look at that in the DAX window. very, very similar to what I just showed you. It's just an exercise in string concatenation. So I detect whether the user has made a single selection or a multi-selection, and I'm just building up a bit of a string saying, you know, the max temperature was, and in this case, it's being, if it was above 25 degrees Celsius, which is quite warm, it'll return some text. Otherwise, it'll drop below down to maybe some warmer temperatures, and then finally return cool degrees today. And then if nothing is selected, it returns a default value. So when it's a cool day, the max temp was a cool 12 degrees today. When it's a warm day versus, I don't have it. Oh, we do have one over 25, so that's really cool. Another thing I do with this bar chart here is I take advantage of the color saturation to deliberately highlight some of these bars differently. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm highlighting those weekend bars differently. So again, if I'm interested in, are weekdays warmer than weekends, you know, does it feel like they are or not? What I do is in my date table, I introduce a column using a DAX formula to say, is the weekday number higher than 5? Now, in DAX, the default for Saturday and Sunday will return a 6 or a 7. So if it's above 5, then treat that as a 1. Otherwise, treat it as a 0. And you might see here there's a whole bunch of zeros for the weekdays and 1s for the weekends. So what that allows me to do is highlight quickly visually which are the weekends in a bar chart by taking advantage of the color saturation feature over the bar chart. Now, maybe a better use of this particular technique might be to color maybe the final bar of your bar chart differently. If you have time series and perhaps over months, and the bar to the right is your current month, which is only partial, you might want to color that differently to highlight and perhaps show your users that it's not a complete month, and maybe that's not lower than all the rest of the bars because it's tanked, or you've got a real serious problem that needs attention, that it's an incomplete month. So there are probably a bunch of reasons why you might want to highlight or annotate certain bars in a certain color. So just remember that you can do that. Jumping back to the dynamic text, if I do hover over one of these bars, I am also using the dynamic measures that I showed you in the tooltips here as well. So we can see in the tooltip that's highlighted here the weekday name, but the DAX annotation. So when I hover over the warm day, or the hot day, it's telling me that this was a hot day, and when I hover over the cooler day, it's telling me this is a cooler day. So hopefully there's some quite cool ideas in there. So moving along, what all I'm perhaps doing here on this chart is highlighting some better ways to maybe emphasize chart titles using backgrounds and inverted font colors to there we go, multi-measure. That's cool. Okay, what we can also use measure tables for, this is something that I see asked for occasionally in the fantastic Power BI community, are ways to either dynamically show and hide measures on a table, but also have in a table grid, have measure names running down the row header. Now we know we can have measure names on the column header in charts and grids, but it's not as straightforward to actually have measure names running down the row header. So you'll see here in this chart, I have one measure selected and one row. But when I select multiple measures, I can actually see them appearing here. And it's also controlling the measures appearing on the bar chart, and here it's also controlling the measures on the in the line chart. So this is perhaps what I wanted to show you slightly earlier. I'm not doing anything new on this page that I hadn't built on the previous pages. All I'm doing is taking the measure name column and dragging it to the measure name to rows and measure values on values, and that allows you to create measure name on row headers. Unfortunately, yeah, you can't do it as easily as just dragging a measure on. You need to build a measure table, and the measure table needs to be one of these smart dynamic calculations. Now, one trick or trap that you get straight away is by default, everything in the column will try and format the same. So if you have percentages in currency and numbers that have decimal places and numbers that don't have decimal places, it will try and format those all equally the same. But you can override that in your in here by using the format feature. So I might actually try that because I haven't tested this. We'll go format, max temp, and then what we might do is go hash dot. And there we go. So for the max temp here, and let's say we want to put a $sign in front of that, and we go okay, and the 28 did it. So you can override the formatting individually in the measure name in the function. So that's just something to be aware of. To augment the annotation, what I showed you before was some really simple annotation. So just taking an if statement and concatenating together some string. There's a fantastic visual in the Office Visual Store that actually will write a more sophisticated story. So again, what I have here is a visual with has a single dimension and a couple of measure names. And I'm going to change this to be my narrative custom visual. When I do that, it's going to look at the data and then ask me a question of the data. It's going to ask me, is this continuous? Is it discrete? Now I'm showing some time series data over a period of time. So I'm going to say, well, this is continuous. And I'm going to ask it to write me a narrative. Now, what this does is it takes my data and it sends it out to the narrative servers. So you have to be careful, or you have to be wary not to use this feature with anything that maybe is super sensitive. But the narrative servers are going to take the information, apply some really smart AI over that, and return back some text. So this is now describing verbally what it thinks it can see in the data, and we can customize this, which is pretty cool. So we highlight the visual, and using the format area, we can say, I think I prefer a bullet list. That looks a little more readable. I can make this a brief description, or I can make it a very wordy description. Maybe make the font a little bigger and come back to medium. But also on this visual, we have a cog here in the top right-hand corner that opens up some additional properties. So by default, I am passing to this visual some date data. So what I will do is I can override the way the language it uses when it's writing. I can look at some characteristics. So for min temperature, it is a number. Larger values are considered good. Should they be summed? No. And likewise with perhaps the max temperature. Let's take this bigger. So good and no. And this is just helping the narrative servers write a better story. We can turn various types of relationships on and off. And we can also highlight bolding. We can bold data in there. So when I come back, now, one thing you have to promise me, if you use this in your report, don't tell your boss you're using this, because you'll get a lot of kudos, and they'll think you're working in evenings writing up all these stories. So, and hopefully they don't notice that when they make slices selections, that it's actually rewriting itself. That's not you sort of pre-writing all the different cases. So I think that's a pretty cool visual, and it's available in the Visual Store. It's free, but it does send your data round trip to their servers. So just be wary that anything particularly sensitive you may want to not use that. So
Philip,
legal
there are 3 people actually want to know the name and a little bit more about it. Can you actually open up? You don't have the build that has the store integrated, but can you open up the store and actually show which one you grabbed there?
Here we go.
This is the narrative one. Yeah.
Yeah, this one here. So it's free and it's in the Office store. I don't know what category that might be under, but just search for narratives. I will be making these files available after the webinar somewhere. I don't know if there will be a link in the YouTube comments page, so you'll be able to. I'll put the visual up, but they'll update the visual too. So you may want to just go and grab the updated visual from time to time. Although it does self-update. So once you have a report that has this embedded in it, and if Narrative Science are releasing new functionality and are improving, you don't have to go back to all your old legacy reports and open them and update to the new visual and save them or anything like that. It works quite seamlessly. So that's kind of cool. So Narratives for Business Intelligence in the Office store.
I love Ruben's comment. This is freaking awesome.
I think so. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And then also, it's probably worth mentioning, the title that you did on the updates. You made your title dynamic. That's doubly important for tooltips, because tooltips only let you display a measure. Everybody wants to go out and display things like that in their tooltip, but all you get is like numbers, count of the number of fish rather than. Anyways, you get the idea, right?
No, that's cool. Yes,
yeah.
So KPIs. For a long time, we've been asking for the ability to have traffic light type KPIs. I'll get rid of that. In our grids and matrices, so the ability to have the red, the orange, the green light for things that are good, things that are bad. And we still don't have a really good implementation of that. We've got some fantastic ideas that have come through about using the Unichar function, but what I wanted to show you was how you might achieve this using the URL. So this is going out to an independent server and perhaps using an icon from an icon set somewhere. And I have built that. Let me just find the measure that I took out, and we'll have a look at how this is built. Whoops, we don't want to do that. I need to get my mouse in here somewhere. KPI icon. Okay, so I have a measure that I called KPI icon. Now, I'm using the DAX variable technique here to make it easier to read. If you're not using DAX, the DAX var statement, I highly recommend having a look into it, because it does make medium to complex DAX much more readable. I don't think it'll make it much faster, but it definitely makes it more readable. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking I'm looking at my max temp value, and again, if it's higher than 25, I want to give it a value. Now, this value is just the unique number in the URL that I'm going to go and fish and find. So we have a 24, a 19, and an 01. And actually, let's make the size 16. And that builds out here a URL. So if I was to drop in the number 25 there and the number 16 here, and put that into my browser, I'll get an icon or a graphic or an image or whichever. So let's drag this into my chart here, and you'll see that it's quite small. In fact, I'll make that larger. Okay. So in the matrix, with my KPI icon, what I can do is I can specify that this data category is an image URL. So when I drag this to my visual, it has a look, it knows that the data category is an image URL, so it will convert that UNC or the address bar that I dynamically created and go away and try and find that. Now the caveat here is you are relying that external website is up, that it's, it needs to be publicly available. They're not going to sort of take it down partway through whatever it is you're doing. If it's one that you control, that's all the better. But it does allow you to create quite a different range of icons to, again, visually bring your story home. Now there was a great, fantastic blog post by Chris Webb that did find its way into the latest release of Power BI Desktop as a quick measure. But you can also use the Unichar function too. So with the Unichar function, you can provide a number, and it will return one of the many emojis or icons available in the unichar set. So what I have done on this particular page is I've created a matrix with numbers starting at number 844 and going up to, or actually 844 row and going up to whatever. So I just have a 10 by however long matrix, and I can go down and hunt through for these and maybe find some icons that I might want to use. There's all sorts in here that could be quite useful for creating KPI icon sets, etc. There's language as well. So just off on a bit of a tangent, I found card unichar values, and I can play a bit of a game in Power BI. So player 1 versus player 2, add these numbers up and see who actually wins. So this is actually just using unichar.
I found one of the easiest ways to do that for me is actually use conditional formatting and then collapse the width of the column down to basically nothing. And what it does is it gives you a red, green, yellow.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, something similar we saw in the most recent Data Insight Summit and Will session. He showed that. That's quite effective, actually. I did like that. Very, very quick and easy, and lightweight as well. So it's not going to slow down your model.
That's right.
Forecasting. What I'm demonstrating here is the two ways that you can do forecasting inside Power BI. We have the classic line chart. Now, originally there was no ability to turn on analytics, but now we've got the ability when you have a standard line chart with a single series. If you have multiple series, this won't work. And so as long as you have a single series, you can go to the analytics property, drop down and add a forecasting line. You don't get a lot of control over the forecasting line, but it's a very quick, effective way to get that in. The second chart I have here at the bottom is an R script chart. So what we can see in this R script chart are a couple of lines of R script code, but if you are comfortable and familiar with R, it does mean that you can have a lot more control over the way and the technique the forecasting will go about. So again, I can choose my dynamic measure, and I can have weather forecasting at home. Whoop, don't know why that's gone away, but I can choose a different date range. And the importantly, the R script will respond and react to these slices outside there. I wanted to touch briefly on bidirectional relationships. This is a new relationship technique that Microsoft introduced for data modeling inside Power BI desktop and also in SSAS 2016 and 2017. I don't believe it's in Excel yet. But this I wanted to show you how this might solve some many-to-many relationships. So what I have here in a different Power BI desktop model is a set of 3 tables, product, date, and sales with a standard relationship, and I've cloned these 3 tables to a different to an identical copy. The only difference between these 2 sets is this relationship here has an arrow going up and down, whereas over here the arrow only goes down. So these 2 relationships are classic single directional one-to-many relationships, whereas over here, when I click on it, what we can see is it's using the new both cross filter. Now, under the covers, what that is doing is it's mashing these two tables together. So it means that for some data scenarios on your report, it will make life easier for you. So let's have a look at a really quick example of that. So the grid we're seeing here is just using the 3 tables that are using the single directional. Looks all right quickly, but when you drill down, you'll notice that the numbers just repeat over and over and over again. We've got the count of products, which come from one of those 2 dimension tables, and the date. Now, they can't see each other. There's no way for these to see each other with the standard single directional relationship. But if we show both of those side by side, what we have now, the set of 3 tables where the bidirectional relationship is turned on, the numbers now start to make sense. Now, you'll have to believe me that quite correctly, the number of products on the particular day is this here. But the only difference between this grid here and this grid here is enabling the bidirectional relationship on one of those, between one of those sets of tables. Now, I would caution you to use this unless you know it's going to help you. I know that when you add tables to Power BI, it will try to auto-detect the relationship between tables. Might sometimes turn this feature on, and maybe in a place where you don't want it to be turned on. So I guess the takeaway here is, if you do have a data model where the numbers are looking a bit strange to you and you're scratching your head as to why that might be happening, go and just double check the relationship direction, because I think you might find that in some places it's turned on where you don't need it, and maybe it's not turned on in some places where you do need it, and that can have an influence on the numbers that are returned to your report. So how are we going for time here? We've got 5 more minutes to see if we can use Power BI to optimize Power BI. Okay, so with Power BI Desktop, it's actually using a data modeling engine that's come from Microsoft Analysis Services. It's what we call a tabular analysis services model. Now, Power BI has been around for just over 2 years, but Analysis Services has been around a lot longer. It's quite a mature technology, and there are a whole bunch of tools that we've been able to use for years and years with tabular analysis services models that we can actually use with Power BI. And I'm just going to quickly run through some of those tools and how you might use them to take it to optimize your model. So first of all, there's a wonderful tool called DAX Studio, which is free, that you can download. And I'm going to connect. It is aware of what Power BI models you have open on your desktop at any particular time. So I can connect to that, and what we can see over here are the tables in my data model, including the hidden date tables. I can write DAX against that, so I can go evaluate dates, run that, and I get a return. I can actually filter this. I can write my DAX. I can optimize my DAX. I can look at query plans. I can look at server timings. But a really cool thing about DAX Studio is when you come down to the bottom corner, it's telling us what port the Power BI model that we're connected to is sitting on. So in this case, it's sitting on port 15228. So that means, for those of you who are using familiar with SQL tools like SSMS, I can open up SSMS, I can create a new query, and I can connect to my local host 15228. And not only can I explore my model, I can start writing MDX, which is a language, against my Power BI desktop model. And I can use those dynamic, there we go, 0 from model. Return a value. I would need to put dates into a dimension here. I can write DAX. I can run Profiler. Profiler is a tracing tool that captures every single query that's been running through. So I can turn on my Profiler window. It hasn't captured anything yet. I'll just clear the window. I'll go back to my Power BI desktop report and start clicking on some things. So I might click on here, click on here, click on here, come back to Profiler. And here we go. I can actually pause that and see the DAX queries that are going on under the covers. Now, I can't change the DAX queries, but if I'm struggling or trying to understand why one particular area of my model is running slowly, I have access to a wide range of tools that have been around for a long time to maybe help me better understand about what's going on. And that means maybe when I start changing my DAX, I can come back and look at query plans. I can have a look at all sorts that can perhaps show me how I am going. Although one area that is really good is the ability to execute what we call in a database world a DMV against my model. So a particular DMV that two DMVs that I find useful are show me my measures. So let's go select star from $ measures, run that, and this is showing me some detail about every measure that's in my Power BI desktop model. And the one I want to draw you to is this expression column. So this shows me the formulas that I've written throughout my Power BI desktop model. Now, this could be really helpful for building dynamic or automatic documentation. I mean, there's nothing that you can see in here that you can't already see in your Power BI desktop model, but it allows you to extract that, update it. You could query your model on a regular basis and store that in a text file, version control. There's all sorts of ways that this expression column might be useful to you. The other one that I use quite heavily is the memory object. Here we go, object memory usage. So if we run this against my DAX model, this will find every single object, columns, tables, data, and importantly, how much memory is it using? So in my Power BI desktop model, what's consuming all of the memory? Now I can do this in DAX Studio, which is a wonderful tool, but equally I can use Power BI to do that. So what I have here is another Power BI desktop model. And if we have a look at the queries for this, I am connecting to my other Power BI desktop. And the query that I'm running is just my DMV. And that's returning to Power BI desktop the result set, which I can split up. The column I'm interested in is this memory column. So this can quickly tell me what's using up in my model all of the memory. And what I'm seeing here is I've got a column called batch ID, which is by far and away the biggest memory hog over this data model. And if I show you the file size of this model, you'll have to believe me here, but it's currently sitting here at 13 megabytes. If I go back to the model that I've been using to demonstrate to you,
I wonder if we just lost Phil. Phil, can you hear me? Well, there you go. It looks like Phil wanted to finish a little bit early, but I don't think he actually meant to do it this way. I think what he was going to show you that going out and taking it and having dates can actually go out and radically increase the size of your file. And you can actually go out and turn that off underneath of options inside of your toolbar. And actually it's called Smart Time or Smart Date. So with that, I want to apologize. I don't know what happened. Hopefully everybody in New Zealand is okay. But I'm going to go ahead and draw this to a close. So thanks to Philip, thanks to Seth, thanks to all the guys that actually got to spend last week with that the Microsoft Data Insight Summit. And next week, actually, I'm going to be doing the operational best practices. Siva, who is actually registered to do that presentation, his wife needs to be taken for surgery. She's okay, but he's actually going to be off. So I'll be actually covering that session. And I was looking at what I'm going to be doing right now. So I'll be preparing between now and next week. So if you guys have got topics that you would like to see for next week, email me at CHASS or go ahead and chat down here at the bottom of the YouTube window. Otherwise, excuse me, I'll have Phil put out in the notes what he was actually going to finish that with. Thank you very much, guys, and you guys have a great day.